Hi everyone, great to see you again. This week, or to be more precise, over the next 2 weeks, I want to talk about foundations, and it needs 2 weeks because it's a small word, but it's a big subject, something that's often overlooked, the importance of having a good foundation in every area of life. And that's why we're here. We're at a building site where houses have to have foundations, and I'll come back to that a little bit more and show you a funny clip of what happens when they don't. But just to give you a bit of background, I worked in the building supply industry for many years. It's what took me from the UK to the Isle of Man, which led me going into ministry, so I'm very grateful for it. So I have a bit of knowledge. I know a lot of builders over the years, site visits, so I have a reasonable idea of what it takes to build a house. And having checked it out, I'm going to go through the process and read it out to you step by step. So here goes. First step is site preparation. So you find the site for the house and you prepare it. It might need clearing because if there has been a structure on there before, that needs getting rid of. Where we used to live on the Isle of Man, they built some houses on the site of an old gasworks. So before they could do anything else, they had to go onto the site, clear the ground, detoxify it. That's all part of the preparation before they could even put any foundations in. The next step is foundations, putting the foundations in, of which I'll talk more about later. Step 3 is superstructure, or part of it, where the surfaces are laid, so drainage, plumbing, things like that, things that need to go into the ground before it's too late, including the electricity supply, gas supply. Then the next part of the superstructure is to build the frame of the house. Many houses now have a timber frame, but that could be brick or concrete block frame or something else. After that, the next step, step 5, is the roof. Getting the roof on, because otherwise anything you try and do in the house, if the roof's not on and it rains, it's going to get wet and ruined. After that comes the first fix, which is the pipe work. So now actually putting the pipe work in and the electrical cabling. After that comes the drainage. So the drainage that you put in as you did the foundations, it's now connecting it to the sewers and various other things, connecting it to the mains. After that comes the dry lining, where the ceilings and walls are plasterboarded, boarded out, ready for decoration. After that comes the second fix. So that involves internal joinery, kitchen, bathroom, putting the doors on, tiling, flooring, all the bits and pieces like that, where the house begins to look nice inside rather than just outside. After that comes decorating. The finishing touches now, and outside decorating in the form of landscaping. The final bit is completion, where it's signed over. But by far the most important part of this whole process is building the foundations. It's the most important part of any building project at all, because without the right foundations, without digging down, foundations cannot be shallow. Any builder will tell you, any structural engineer will tell you, you've got to go down deep. And the softer the ground, the deeper you have to go down to build a strong foundation to build the house upon. And if you don't build that strong foundation, what will happen next can be a disaster when the storm comes. Now, most of you probably will have seen house foundations. You move into a house, even to a new house, and it's all done. Can I encourage you, maybe have a look at a building site. I mentioned earlier that they built houses out the back of the house where we used to live in the Isle of Man, on the site of an old gasworks. And it's really interesting. If ever you watch a building site, there doesn't seem to be much happening for a long time. And that's while they do the preparation, the digging out and building the foundations. That takes a long time, making sure the ground is right and stable and the foundations are deep and the concrete is laid in stages so that it's strong and held together with steel rods and won't move. And it's only after all that is done, and that can take months, that they start putting the houses on. And have you ever noticed the houses seem to go up really quickly? You could be driving past a site or walking past, nothing happens for months, and then all of a sudden, wow, where did those houses come from? Because the foundations are so important and they take time to build. You cannot rush through building foundations, and they may not be sexy like the nice house, but they're important. And if you don't build them, if you just concentrate on the nice looking bits, you're going to end up in trouble. And let me show you the kind of trouble with a short video clip on a house built without the right foundations.
My name is Rick Hickenbottom, and I am a real estate agent who's ready to do some house hunting today. We got a real good one to show you, a real doozy. This is actually my favorite home that I've shown, so without any further delay, let's all take a look at this charming 4-bedroom, 3.5 bath Southern Colonial. Now I know what you're thinking, this home doesn't look safe. Let me assure you, it is located in the safest neighborhood in the county. Now let's head into my very favorite room.
I hope you enjoyed that short video clip, obviously done as a joke. But all joking aside, you can see in the clip what happens to a house that hasn't been built on the right foundation, where it's a poor foundation or no foundation at all. And what's true of building a house is true of building anything. It's true of anything we build in life. And that's something I want to look at now. If the personal foundation in our life isn't right, isn't strong enough, hasn't been built correctly, or we built on the wrong one, then when the storm comes in life, then our lives are liable to collapse. And I'll talk more about that later in detail. But it's not just personally. Churches, churches can come and go if the foundation isn't right. And not just churches, across the world, every society is built on foundations, and those foundations, generally we know them as laws. So every country will have a foundation built on laws. You maybe call it a constitution or something. Our church is a constitution, and it consists of various laws that have been put into place, enacted, so that everybody knows where they stand, and that there is peace and justice and presumably fairness for all. So laws are important and they're part of the foundation. And there are some crazy laws about. Just want to read a couple to you, just as a little bit of fun, about some of the crazy laws that are still in place in UK legislation. So here are a few that are actually still enshrined in law. All beach whales and sturgeons, which is a fish, must be offered to the reigning monarch, the Queen, if they're found on a beach or caught. You got to ring up the Queen and say, "Hey, do you want this, or can I have it?" I know it sounds crazy. Here's another one. It is illegal to be drunk in a pub. I don't see that being, enforced in many pubs, but it is actually illegal to be drunk in a pub. Here's another one. It's an offence to be drunk and in charge of herding cattle in England and Wales. So any farmers out there, watch what you're drinking, stick to the soft drinks. Here's another one. It is illegal to activate your burglar alarm without first nominating a key holder who can switch it off in your absence. How many of you have got burglar alarms and you haven't got a nominated key holder? You are breaking the law. And I know all these seem crazy. Here's one final crazy one. It is illegal for a Minister of Parliament, an MP, to wear a suit of armour in Parliament. These are funny laws, but let's move aside from crazy, quirky laws to something a little bit more serious. In our own country, in fairly recent history, it was actually not illegal to have slaves or to buy or sell slaves. Crazy when you think about it. It was only through people like William Wilberforce, a committed Christian who saw the gross injustice of this and how it went against everything that the Bible and Jesus stood for, who campaigned against it. And until 1833, laws were enacted to abolish slavery, which came into effect across most of the British Empire in 1834. It's not that long ago. But it took somebody to stand up and say, our laws, our foundational laws are wrong in this area. They need changing. The sad thing is that even now in our country, with slavery having been abolished for almost 200 years, there is still slavery in the form of trafficking and sex trafficking that we need to stand up against and speak out against. And thank God for organisations like Hope for Justice that do that. Across the Atlantic Ocean in the United States of America, it took a little bit longer. It was 1864 before the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution was enacted in law and written into the Constitution that abolished slavery in the US. It took a number of years for that to begin to filter. And it's really interesting, especially in the current climate, that even though the law changed, for some people their minds and hearts didn't change. Especially in the Deep South, and it's not that long ago that we were dealing with the Ku Klux Klan and the white robes and the pointed hats and the burning of black people. And you say, thank God that that's gone, but hey, current issue across the globe is the treatment of black people, especially in a supposedly advanced country like America, where for ordinary black people, I'm not going to go on one side of the argument or the other, but some interesting facts here. Even what you would call ordinary black people, like ministers, T.D. Jakes spoke recently of how his son was involved in a car accident and he was terrified of the police arriving and the police arresting him without him being there, because of what can happen to young black men caught up in crime, even though his son was innocent. And there are all sorts of background things going on here, but there is a definite inequality issue that needs to be addressed, that needs to be spoken about and stood up against. And so in America or anywhere around the world where we see injustice or unfairness, we should speak out. We should stand up, we should do something about it. No country around the world, no society can survive if its foundations are wrong. And the foundations of any fair society should be justice and freedom for all, where everyone is treated equal and right. That is foundational, and this is why foundations are not just about houses. Foundations affect all of us, everywhere, in every facet of our lives and culture. So if we don't get the foundations right, as we can see now, we riots across America that are spreading, then we're liable to collapse when the storm comes. So why is it important to speak out? Can we not just stay silent? You know, we can say, well, I'm not racist, so it doesn't matter. I'll not get involved. And to a degree that can work, but I don't believe it's what we're called to do. Why do I say that? Because I base my belief, my opinion, whatever you want to call it, on the life of Jesus. I look at Jesus and how he lived, and I believe it's what he calls us to do. I look at how Jesus, when you read through the Gospels, how he treated the broken, the marginalized, those of different race and culture, some that were even hated by his own people, how the Jews hated Samaritans. How Jesus dealt with them, how those who were disabled, lepers, women, second-class citizens, look how Jesus treated them. Jesus spoke up, he stood up, he did something about it. He included people, he loved people. And he wasn't afraid of getting into trouble with the authorities, the religious authorities, for speaking his mind where he saw that inequality. So that's why I would believe we should do the same. If you want another example of not just what he does, but his amazing teaching, read the Sermon on the Mount, or as it's sometimes known as the Beatitudes. I like that. It's the be attitudes, not the do attitudes. It's what we become, not just what we do. It has to be part of our character. It can't be something on a tick box list that says, oh, you know, I put a nice post out on Facebook, Black Lives Matter, therefore I'm not a racist, or I really care about black people. Great for doing that, but maybe that's not enough. We have to become more like Jesus if we want to see real change. And his teachings, please take the time to read them and meditate them, especially the Sermon on the Mount, were so influential that they influenced people like Mahatma Gandhi and other key people throughout history, and has transformed the lives of many people and even cultures around the world. So it's important, if we want to look at a strong foundation, we come back to two things. One, it has to become personal. It's no good saying, well, that country or that person needs to have a strong foundation. We must make it personal. What are our foundations like? And then what do we measure them against? What is a good foundation? I believe the only good foundation is Jesus. And that's what we'll move on to next, and probably finish it off next week. But how we must look at this personally and where Jesus fits into all of this. Because as I said earlier, and as we saw earlier in the video, without the strong foundation, when the storm comes, we will collapse. So as you've probably gathered, this week we're talking about foundations, having a good foundation, laying the right foundations. And as earlier, how I described the foundations necessary for building a house, or certainly building a house upon so that the house stands, the same applies to our lives. You know, if our foundations aren't right, everything else can begin to crumble. And the Bible talks about having the right foundations in a number of places. But it's more specific than that, because when the Bible talks about having the right foundations, it talks in particular about having the right foundation, singular. And that foundation is a person, and it's not us. And I have to stress, it's not us. And you may think, well, that's obvious. Of course, it's not us. It's Jesus. And yes, and I'll come back to that in a moment with some scriptures. But it might be obvious, but it doesn't mean it's a reality in our lives, because how many of us, come on, let's be honest, think we've built a strong foundation only to find out that when the storm comes, everything tumbles. Everything comes crashing down. Our emotions go haywire. We could be up here 1 minute following Jesus, the next minute we've come down with a crash. That happens when the foundations aren't good. See, when the weather's great, it doesn't really matter about the foundations. No wind, no storm, the house will stand. But when the storm comes, if the foundation isn't strong, the house will collapse. And that is what happens to us. And that's why this is so important, and why I want to look at why we need the right foundation, who that foundation is, how this all works, and why we cannot continue as followers of Jesus, as disciples, unless we build that foundation. And the whole point of this, it's not to beat you or anybody else up or myself. It's to come to an honest realization that maybe we need to go back and build the foundation. And that might seem scary. If you've been a Christian a long time, you think, I don't want to go back to the beginning. I've been doing this a long time. But can we be honest enough to admit that what we've been building on has not been the right foundation? And it's why we're not where we should be. It's why we're not living life the way Jesus promised we would be able to live it. So how about we honestly examine ourselves and in humility come before the Father and say, I've been building on the wrong foundation. Help me to build on the right foundation, so that from here on in, when the storms come, I will stand, and also I hope to flourish rather than collapse. So let's look at some scriptures. And the first one I want to look at is in the Old Testament. This is a period of time where the Jewish people are still living under the law, and the law is their foundation. Their whole nation is built on the law, on how to live, how to look after each other. And it's great, and God has put this wonderful set of guidelines in place to help them. But that help has also proved to be a hindrance. The law showed the people of God, as it does for everybody, that we cannot live up to the standard of the law. And remember, with the law, just as is with the law in our country, it's no good me, going to a shop at night, smashing the window and stealing a nice computer because I fancied it. and then going to court and standing before the judge and saying, but it's not that bad because I didn't murder somebody, so it doesn't really matter. The judge wouldn't be interested, the jury wouldn't be interested, because the fact remains is I've broken the law. And that it was the same with the law that God gave to his people. You only had to break one law to break the whole law. And we think of the law as the 10 Commandments. There's actually 613 commandments, I think. So there's plenty of scope for breaking the law. And the people of God couldn't use it as a foundation. If anything, the foundation was crushing them. They needed a better way. And there's a wonderful piece of scripture in Isaiah 33, verse 6, that prophesies that God is going to give them a better foundation. Let me read it to you. It says this: He will be the sure foundation for your times, a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. And the fear of the Lord is the key to this treasure. Really interesting verse. And it's obviously prophesying about Jesus, saying he will be, when he comes, he will be the foundation for your times, the only foundation. So the previous foundation which didn't work, the law, has to go. This foundation will be the right foundation. And I love how it says he will be a rich store of salvation, not a store, a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. And the emphasis on rich is that it will never run out. It is bountiful. It is vast. We can constantly draw from this rich source and never ever exhaust the source, because the source is God himself. A rich store of salvation, as in being saved by God, not ourselves. Wisdom, knowing the right thing to do. You know, how many of us would love to know the right thing to do all the time? This is what it promises. A knowledge, not just head knowledge. This is a knowledge of God himself, to know God. And the last bit there, the fear of the Lord is the key to this treasure. And often as Christians, we get this fear of the Lord bit wrong. Or fear God. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. But we misunderstand what that fear is. What it really means is to fear to be apart from him, not to fear his wrath and his judgment. We know that God is a God of justice and there'll be a time for that. But this is a fear of being without him. When you really love somebody and you know it, and it's almost like it's written in your heart, it's deep within your soul, your love for this person, you have a fear of coming to a situation where you're not going to see them again or be apart from them. It genuinely fills you with fear and sadness and remorse. And you think, I don't like this. I don't like it. I don't want it. I want to be back with this person. I want to be near them again. I don't even want to entertain the thoughts of not being around them and being close to them, because when I'm close to them, it fills me up. Imagine that magnified beyond measure. This is what it's like in our relationship with God. And so the fear of the Lord should be that we are so intimate with God and so close to him that when we're apart, for whatever reason, be it something we've done wrong or we've drifted or been distracted, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. The fact is we've drifted away. We should ache, like our stomach should churn, our heart should ache, as if when we're deeply in love with somebody, for a deep longing to be back in the intimacy and closeness of God. We should fear being apart from him. That's what it means. And when we have that kind of heart, where we fear being apart from him, that is the key to the treasure of all that God has to offer. Because the closer we get to him, the more he wants to give us. God wants to bless us so much, but we have to draw near, as the Bible says. We have to draw near to get it. And there have been times in my life, and I don't bring any of these messages to beat people up, but maybe to make you think and challenge. If being close and intimate with God doesn't really bother you, then you're not in a good place. I don't care how good your life is. You are not in a good place, and you certainly have not built on the right foundations. And your life might be great at this moment, and you can get by doing what you do with your interests and everything else, doing what you love to do. But unless you love being around Jesus more, that's a sign that you've built on the wrong foundation and something is deeply wrong with your life and you need to go back to the beginning and build that foundation. So this is probably a good place to pause, and we'll continue next week. But can I just appeal to you, if that is ringing some bells with you, where you've realized that Jesus is not the most important thing in your life, and probably not even close to that. You've got many other things that you love more or love to do more. And we've all got work to do, and homes and families and things like that that occupy our time. That's not what I'm talking about. But what occupies your thought life most of the time? You know, I love motorbikes, you know, and there was a point many years ago where I was so consumed about motorbikes that it was all I could think about. And I came to a point where I got rid of the bike I had and didn't ride a bike for about 3 years. Because I thought it's got to go. It's got to go. It's getting in the way of my walk with God, and it's not that you have to get rid of things, but it's getting the perspective. And so, if that's you, can I encourage you, tune in next week as we finish off this message. Or if you can't wait that long, and you realise that actually that is me, and I could do with some help, and we all need help, then that's what discipleship is all about. Where we help each other. So if that's you, get in touch. You don't have to wait till next week. Get in touch, and we'll look at how we can disciple you, either personally or pair you up with 1 or 2 people to disciple each other, so that you can walk with each other in the footsteps of the Rabbi Jesus and learn to be like him. But until then, see you next week. Thanks for tuning in for part 1. Part 2 on building on the right foundation will continue next week. God bless you. Bye.